The mountains do not forget. People do. That is the difference. In Madison County, North Carolina, there are ridges no one names anymore, not because they were never named, but because saying their names out loud began to feel like an invitation to something that listens. It was the autumn of 1916 when the first girl disappeared. But that's not where the story begins. No, stories like this never begin with the first victim. They begin years earlier, quietly, when no one is paying attention. Silas Ward arrived in Madison County in the spring of 1908. No one saw him come in. One day, the ridge was empty. The next, there was smoke rising from a chimney that had not existed before. People asked questions at first. They always do. Where'd he come from? Tennessee, maybe? Or Virginia? Men like that don't just appear. But mountains have a way of swallowing curiosity. By winter, people stopped asking. By the next year, they stopped looking. His cabin sat high above the valley, where the fog moved slower and the wind sounded wrong. It was built with precision, too precise for a man who claimed to live alone. Firewood stacked in perfect lines, garden rows cut straight as a ruler, no wasted motion, no wasted effort, like a man preparing for something, or remembering something. Silas rarely came down to Marshall. When he did, the air shifted. Not in a way you could explain, but in a way you could feel. Men who had fought, hunted, buried children through harsh winters, those men avoided his eyes. Because his eyes did not move the way other men's eyes did. They didn't search. They didn't react. They simply observed. As if he wasn't looking at you, but through you. By 1915, the mountains had already begun whispering. It started with the lights. Not lantern light, not firelight. Something brighter, sharper, flashing in the woods behind his cabin long after midnight. Hours at a time. Always in the same place. Always returning. John Mercer was the first to speak of it out loud. He was not a man given to stories. He was a man of traps, soil, and silence. So when he came down to the warehouse in Marshall and said, "I heard something up near that ridge," people listened. He didn't call it singing. He didn't call it crying. He said it was something in between, something human, but not meant for human ears. After that, others admitted they had heard it too, quietly, reluctantly, because saying it out loud made it real, and making it real meant you had to decide what to do about it, and no one wanted to go up that ridge. Winter came early that year, hard, the kind of winter that buries roads and silences entire valleys. For months, families didn't see each other, didn't check in, didn't ask questions. The mountains closed in, and whatever moved inside them was left alone. When spring finally broke, something was missing. At first it was small enough to ignore. A delay, a late return, a path not walked that day. Then came Sarah Holt. 17. Strong. The kind of girl who knew every trail, every bend in the stream, every sound the forest made. She left at dawn, just like she always did, bucket in hand. No fear, no hesitation. She never came back. They searched for 3 days. Men who knew the land better than they knew their own homes. They found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign of struggle, not even the bucket. It was as if the mountain had opened and swallowed her whole. That's when people started looking up, toward the ridge, toward the cabin, toward the man who had been there all along, watching, waiting. And for the first time since 1908, someone said his name out loud like it meant something. Silas Bhutan. And somewhere, deep in the woods behind his cabin, something answered. Before we go deeper, understand this. This story isn't for everyone. If you're still here, you're one of the few who can face what America buried. Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? And would you dare hear this story from your own backyard? Fear does not arrive all at once. It grows, quietly, like rot beneath wood. For weeks after Sarah Holt vanished, the mountains held their silence. That was the worst part. If there had been blood, a scream, a sign, people could have called it something. An animal, an accident, even God's will. But this was nothing. And nothing is harder to fight than something you cannot name. Thomas Holt aged 10 years in 10 days. He stopped speaking much, stopped sleeping entirely. Each morning before sunrise, he walked the same path his daughter had taken, from the cabin to the stream and back again. Every step measured, every inch of dirt memorized. As if the ground might confess if he stared long enough. It never did. Sheriff Robert Clay arrived 3 days after the search began. He was not a man easily shaken. He had seen bodies pulled from rivers, men crushed under wagons, families lost to fever. But this absence unsettled him, because there was no story here. Only a question. "Show me where she walked," he said. Thomas Holt did not answer. He simply turned and walked. Clay followed, 2 deputies behind him. The trail was narrow but clear, used, familiar. There were no signs of disturbance, no broken brush, no dragged earth, no footprints except the ones they were making now. At the stream, Clay crouched. The water moved slow and steady over stone, clear, too clear. He watched it for a long moment, then dipped his hand in. Cold, mountain cold, alive. "She didn't fall," Clay said finally. Thomas Holt's voice came like gravel. "She didn't." That night, Clay sat alone in the Holt cabin, listening, not for sound, but for absence, because something was wrong with the quiet here. It wasn't natural. It felt held, like the mountain itself was waiting. 3 weeks passed. Life tried to return. It always does. Fields needed tending. Livestock needed feeding. Children needed watching, more closely now. And then, it happened again. Daniel Pierce was 21, strong, fast, known for tracking deer across miles of unforgiving terrain. If anyone could survive the woods, it was him. He left before sunrise, gun on his shoulder, dog at his side. Confident. By sunset, the dog came back alone. It walked into the yard slow, tail low, eyes wide with something close to shame. William Pierce knew before anyone spoke. He stepped forward, knelt, looked into the animal's eyes like it might explain something no human could. "Where is he?" he whispered. The dog whined. Once, then lay down, refusing to move. The search began that same night, torches cutting through the dark. Men moving faster now, less cautious, more afraid. They found the dog's trail first, then Daniel's, boot prints, clear, steady, confident. Then, nothing. The tracks ended mid-stride, no turn, no fall, no sign of struggle. Just gone. Sheriff Clay stood over the last footprint for a long time. Too long. "Men don't vanish like this," one of the deputies muttered. Clay didn't respond. Because in that moment, he wasn't sure that was still true. By the next morning, the entire county knew. 2 people, gone. No trace, no explanation. And now, people weren't just whispering. They were watching. Watching the ridge. Watching the trees. Watching each other. Because something had changed. The mountains no longer felt like home. They felt like something else. Something older. Something that had been patient. And was no longer hiding. That night, for the first time, Sheriff Clay looked toward Silas Ward's cabin and didn't look away. Smoke rose from the chimney. Slow, steady, deliberate. As if nothing had happened. As if no one was missing. As if the mountain itself was breathing through that place. Clay spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I'm going up there." No one argued, but no one volunteered to go with him either. Because deep down, they all knew something now, something they didn't want to say out loud. People weren't disappearing in the mountains. They were being taken. And whatever was taking them lived on that ridge. Some men are feared for what they've done, others for what they might do. Silas Ward was neither. He was feared because no one knew which one he was. The climb to his cabin was not meant for visitors. That much became clear within the first hour. The trail wasn't a trail. It twisted, doubled back, disappeared under roots and stone, as if the mountain itself had tried to erase the path and failed. Sheriff Robert Clay didn't like that. He didn't like anything about this place. The air felt thinner here, not weaker, just wrong. "You sure this is the way?" one of the deputies asked. Clay didn't answer, because he wasn't sure, and that bothered him more than anything else. They reached the ridge just before noon. The trees opened slightly, and there it was. Silas Ward's cabin. It stood alone, not abandoned, not neglected, but isolated in a way that felt deliberate. Everything about it was precise. The wood stacked perfectly, the ground cleared too clean, the silence too complete. No birds, no insects, nothing. Clay felt it immediately, that quiet again, that unnatural stillness, like the air was waiting. Silas was already outside. That was the first thing that didn't sit right. He wasn't surprised, didn't look up sharply, didn't reach for anything. He simply stood there, as if he had been expecting them. "Sheriff," Silas said. Clay stopped. The deputies shifted behind him. "You know me?" Clay asked. Silas gave the smallest nod. "You've been thinking about coming." The words landed wrong, not threatening, not defensive, just certain. Clay stepped forward, carefully, measured. "We are looking into a disappearance," he said. "2 now." Silas didn't respond immediately. He turned slightly, looking past them, toward the trees. "The mountains take what they want," he said quietly. One of the deputies scoffed. "People don't just disappear." Silas looked at him then, slowly, and for a moment, the man forgot how to breathe, because those eyes weren't empty. They were full, too full, like something was standing behind them. "Watching through. They do here," Silas said. Clay stepped in, cutting the moment. "We're going to ask you some questions." Silas nodded again. "You can ask." Clay gestured toward the cabin. "You mind if we take a look inside?" A pause, just long enough to matter. Then Silas stepped aside. "Go ahead." Inside, everything was in order. Too much order. Bed made tight. Table clean. Shelves stocked. Not a single thing out of place. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a place, waiting for inspection. Clay moved slowly, eyes scanning everything. Not what was there, but what wasn't. No personal items, no letters, no photographs, no past. "Been here long?" Clay asked. "Long enough," Silas replied. "Where before?" Silas didn't answer. Clay turned, met his eyes. "I asked you something." Silas held his gaze, unblinking. "Before doesn't matter here." That answer stayed in the room. Heavy. One of the deputies opened a drawer. Empty. Another checked beneath the bed. Nothing. It was clean. Too clean. Clay stepped outside again. The air felt colder now. He looked toward the forest behind the cabin, dense, dark, uninviting. "You go back there?" he asked. Silas followed his gaze. "Sometimes." "What's back there?" A longer pause. Silas spoke without looking at him. "Things that were here before us." The deputy laughed nervously. "Like what?" Silas finally turned. "You wouldn't understand it if I told you." Silence. The wind moved through the trees, low, almost like a whisper. Clay felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not yet, but something close. "You hear anything at night?" Clay asked. Silas smiled, just slightly. "I hear everything." That was enough. Clay nodded once. Sharp. "We'll be back." Silas didn't react, didn't ask why, didn't question it. He simply said, "I know." They left the ridge without speaker. Not until the cabin disappeared behind the trees. Then one of the deputies muttered, "There's something wrong with that man." Clay kept walking, because that wasn't the thought that had taken hold of him, not even close. The thought that stayed with him, the one he couldn't shake, was this. Silas Ward wasn't hiding anything. He wasn't nervous, wasn't careful, wasn't afraid. And a man like that, in a place like this, either knew he couldn't be caught or knew something worse, something no one else understood yet. Behind them, high on the ridge, Silas Ward stood motionless, watching. And deep in the woods behind his cabin, something moved. Chapter 4. The Third Disappearance. Fear spreads faster than truth, and in Madison County, truth was already losing. By June, the mountains had changed, not visibly, not in a way you could point to, but in the way people moved, the way doors were locked earlier, the way children were called inside before sunset, the way men carried rifles, even to fetch water. 2 disappearances could be explained. Bad luck, wild animals, God's will. But 3, that's when people stop explaining and start believing. Emma Caldwell was not the kind of person who vanished. She was steady, predictable, safe, 32 years old. School teacher. Lived alone in a small house near the Valley School. Every morning, same routine. Fire lit, tea boiling, books prepared, and on the morning of June the 23rd, everything began exactly the same. The kettle was still warm when they found it. That's what stayed with people. Not that she was gone, but that she had been there, just moments before. The door was open, not broken, not forced, just open. Inside, a quiet interruption, half-eaten bread on the table, a cup beside it, still full, and no Emma, no sign of struggle, no sound, no trace, gone. This time, the panic didn't wait. It spread fast, like fire through dry wood. 3 people, 3 months, no bodies, no answers, and now, no one was pretending anymore. Sheriff Clay stood in the center of Emma's home, silent, still. He didn't look at the table, didn't look at the door. He looked out the window, toward the ridge, always the ridge. "They're connected," one of the deputies said quietly. Clay nodded. "I know. But we got nothing on him." Clay turned slowly. "We don't need proof to ask questions." That same afternoon, he sent a telegram, not to a neighboring town, not to the state, to Raleigh, because this was no longer a local problem. Marcus Webb arrived 3 days later, and the mountains didn't like him. You could tell. He wasn't built for places like this. Clean suit, sharp eyes, notebook always in hand. A man who believed everything had an answer. That was his first mistake. Clay met him outside the sheriff's office. "You're a long way from the city," Clay said. Webb glanced toward the mountains, studying them. "Looks like it," he replied. They shook hands, firm, professional. But Clay noticed something. Webb's grip tightened just slightly as he looked past him, toward the ridge. They started with the facts. 3 victims, 3 disappearances, no evidence. Webb wrote everything down, every detail, every time, every location. Then he asked for a map. They spread it out on the table. Old worn. Accurate enough? Webb marked each disappearance. Sarah Holt, Daniel Pierce, Emma Caldwell. 3 points. He stepped back, tilted his head. Then, very slowly, he drew a circle. Not perfect, not exact, but close enough. And at the center, there was only one thing. Silas Ward's cabin. The room went quiet. Clay stared at the map. He had felt it, known it, but seeing it made it real. "They're all within range," Webb said softly. "Not random." The deputy shifted. "So what? He's hunting them?" Webb didn't answer. Because that wasn't what bothered him, not even close. He leaned closer to the map, studying the distances. "They're not taken at the same range," he said. 3 miles, 4, then closer again. Clay frowned. "What does that mean?" Webb looked up, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in his eyes. "It means—" He hesitated, as if the answer didn't make sense, even to him. "It means they weren't taken randomly." A pause. They were taken deliberately. That night, Webb couldn't sleep. Not because of the case, but because of the silence. It was different here. He had worked murders before, seen bodies, seen violence. But this absence, this quiet, felt wrong. Like the mountains were holding something back, watching, waiting. And somewhere, far above the valley, on that ridge, a faint light flickered. Once, twice, then again. Webb stood at the window, frozen, watching it. And for a moment, he told himself it was nothing. A lantern, a reflection, a trick of the eye. But deep down, he knew better. Because the light was moving. Not like a man walking, not like a lantern swinging, but in sharp, unnatural bursts, as if something was signaling or answering. Behind him, the town slept. Unaware, but Webb didn't move. He couldn't. Because in that moment, for the first time, he understood something Sheriff Clay had already begun to feel. This wasn't just a man. And whatever was happening on that ridge was only beginning. Chapter 5. The Pattern in the Woods. There are 2 kinds of fear, the kind you feel and the kind you discover. The second one is always worse. Marcus Webb did not believe in superstition. He believed in patterns, in logic, in cause and effect. But the mountains, they didn't care what he believed. For 2 weeks they watched Silas Ward, from a distance, always from a distance. Men rotated in shifts. Hunters, farmers, men who knew the land better than they knew themselves. They took positions along the lower ridge, hidden, patient, and at first there was nothing. Silas worked, chopped wood, fed chickens, tended his garden. He moved like any other man, steady, predictable, human. It almost made them doubt everything. "Maybe we're wrong," one man whispered. Webb didn't answer. Because patterns don't lie. People do. And then, on the 3rd night, something changed. It was just after midnight, the kind of dark that swallows shape and distance. One of the watchers nudged the man beside him. There, a light, faint, moving from the cabin. Silas stepped out, lantern in hand. But he didn't go toward the trail, didn't go toward the valley. He walked into the forest behind his cabin, the thickest part, the part no one ever entered. The light moved slowly at first. Then it disappeared. Not faded, not dimmed. Gone. The men waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. No sound, no movement. Until, just before dawn, the light returned, and Silas walked back. Alone. That same night, it happened again, and again, 3 times in 2 weeks. Always the same. Into the woods, gone for hours. Back before sunrise. No explanation, no reason, only a pattern. And Webb followed patterns. "We go in during daylight," Webb said. Clay didn't like it, not because it was dangerous, but because it felt wrong. Still turned, he agreed. They chose a morning when Silas had gone down to Marshall, watched him leave, waited, then moved. The forest behind the cabin was different, denser, older. The trees grew closer together, their branches blocking out the sky. The ground was thick with leaves, too thick, like nothing had disturbed them in years. Even the air felt heavier, quieter. No birds, no insects, nothing alive. They walked for over an hour, following what barely looked like a path, not a trail, but something worn, repeated, used. Then Joseph Martin stopped. "Wait." He pointed to a tree. At first, Webb didn't see it. Then he did. A mark, carved deep into the bark. Not random, not accidental, deliberate, a symbol. Rough, primitive, but intentional. "More here," another man said. And there were. 1 tree, then another, at least a dozen. Each marked, each different, but somehow connected. Webb crouched beside one, ran his fingers over the carving. Cold. Too cold. He sketched it quickly in his notebook. "These aren't letters," he muttered. Clay looked uneasy. "What are they, then?" Webb didn't answer, because he didn't know. And that was starting to happen more often. They followed the markings, deeper. Until the forest opened. Suddenly, unnaturally. A clearing, perfectly circular. Too perfect. The ground was bare, no grass, no roots, as if nothing could grow there. And in the center, stones, stacked, deliberately arranged. Not random, not natural. A structure, not quite an altar, but not anything else either. No one spoke. They didn't need to, because every man there felt it. Something had happened here, something repeated, over and over again. Webb stepped forward, slowly, carefully. He examined the stones. Then he saw it. Dark stains. Old, dried, but still there. His chest tightened. "Get the doctor," he said quietly. They searched the edges of the clearing, and that's when they found them. Bones. Not many, but enough. Too many. Scattered, some buried shallow, some left exposed, and nearby, fragments, cloth, something once worn, something once belonging to someone. Clay turned away. He had seen death before, but not like this, not hidden, not arranged, not used. Webb stood still, looking at the clearing, at the symbols, at the stones, at the bones, and for the first time, he stopped thinking like an investigator. Because this was not just murder. This was something else, something deliberate, something ritualistic, something that had been happening for a long time. Behind them, deep in the forest, something cracked. A branch. Every man froze, turned. Nothing. No movement, no sound. But the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt aware. Clay spoke first. Low. Tight. "We're not alone out here." Webb didn't respond, because he was already thinking something worse. Not that they weren't alone, but that something had been there all along, watching them. The same way Silas watched. The same way the mountain watched. And somewhere, far behind them, on the ridge, a man stood in front of his cabin, smiling. Because now, they had seen it. And once you see something like that, you don't walk away from it. You become part of it. Disclaimer. This story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental. Chapter 6. The Clearing of Blood. There is a moment in every investigation when doubt dies. For Marcus Webb, that moment came in the clearing. The doctor arrived just before dusk. Henry Sutton, young, educated, still believed science could explain everything. That belief didn't last long. He stepped into the clearing and stopped. Not because of the bones, not because of the silence, but because of the feeling. "This place," he whispered. No one asked him to finish, because they felt it too. Sutton knelt beside the stones. Careful, measured. He removed his gloves, touched the dark stains, rubbed them between his fingers. Then, he smelled them. His face changed, subtly, but enough. "Well?" Clay asked. Sutton didn't look up. "I can't confirm without proper tools," he said slowly. A pause, then quieter. "But I don't think I need them." The words settled heavily. Webb didn't ask. He already knew. Sutton moved to the bones, picked one up carefully, turned it in the fading light. Silence stretched. Then he spoke. "This isn't animal." No one reacted immediately, because reacting meant accepting it. Clay exhaled slowly. "How many?" Sutton hesitated. "At least 3. A longer pause. "Maybe more." The clearing seemed to tighten around them. 3. At least. And that was just what remained. Webb stepped forward. His voice was different now. Colder. "Collect everything." They worked in silence. Bones. Fragments. Cloth. Each piece handled like evidence, but felt like something else. Like something that didn't want to be touched. Joseph Martin uncovered something near the edge. Half buried. A strip of fabric. Worn. Faded, but recognizable. He froze. Clay saw it. "Joseph?" Joseph didn't respond. He just stared at it, then whispered, "That's hers." The words broke something. "Who?" Clay asked. Joseph swallowed. "Sarah Holt." No one spoke after that, because now it wasn't theory. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't fear. It was truth. Sarah Holt hadn't disappeared. She had been brought here. Webb stood in the center of the clearing, turning slowly, taking it all in. The symbols, the stones, the blood, the bones. And something clicked. Not a full answer, but a shape. "This wasn't random," he said. Clay looked at him. "We already know that." Webb shook his head. "No, not just deliberate." He pointed to the ground. "Prepared." The word hung in the air. Clay felt it. That shift again. From crime to something else. This place wasn't used once. Webb continued, his voice steady, controlled. It was used repeatedly. Clay nodded slowly. How long? Webb didn't answer. Because he didn't know. And that was the worst part. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the clearing, long, distorted. And for a moment, it looked like they were moving. Sutton stood. We need to leave, he said. Clay didn't argue. Not because he was afraid, but because something inside him was telling him they had already stayed too long. They gathered what they could, left what they couldn't, because some things felt wrong to take. As they turned to leave, Webb looked back, just once, and for a split second, he thought, he saw something, standing at the edge of the trees, still, watching. But when he blinked, it was gone. They walked faster after that. No one said why. By the time they reached the ridge, night had already begun to fall. And Silas Ward's cabin was glowing. Light spilling from inside. Too bright, too steady. Clay stopped, stared at it. He knows, he said. Webb didn't respond, because he knew something worse. Silas didn't just know. He had been waiting. And somewhere behind them, deep in the forest, the clearing sat in silence. Empty, but not abandoned, because whatever had happened there wasn't finished. Chapter 7. The trap is set. Some monsters hide, others wait to be understood. Marcus Webb made a decision that night, a bad one, a necessary one. I go alone. Clay turned sharply. No. Webb didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. That man doesn't fear you, Webb said calmly. He doesn't fear your deputies, or your badge. Clay stepped closer. And you think he'll fear you? Webb shook his head. No. A pause. I think he'll talk to me. That was worse, because Clay knew men like Silas Ward didn't talk. They revealed. You're walking into something you don't understand, Clay said. Webb met his eyes. I know. Another pause. But neither do you. That settled it. Not agreement, not approval, just truth. The next morning, Webb climbed the ridge alone. No deputies, no weapons drawn, just a notebook. And a lie. Silas was waiting. Of course he was. Standing outside the cabin, blade in hand, sharpening it slowly. The sound, steady, rhythmic, like something else Webb had heard before. You came back, Silas said. Not surprised, not curious, just certain. Webb stopped a few feet away. I've been thinking about buying land up here, he said. A lie, simple, carefully placed. Silas continued sharpening the blade. You don't belong here. Webb smiled slightly. Neither did you once. That made Silas stop, not fully, just enough. A shift, small, but real. How long have you been here? Webb asked. Silas looked past him, toward the trees. Long enough to hear it. Webb didn't react. Hear what? Silas finally looked at him. And this time, there was something behind his eyes. Not emptiness, not madness. Understanding. The mountain, Silas said. A whisper. Webb felt it. That moment. Where a man either dismisses something or listens. He chose to listen. What does it say? Silas smiled. Not wide, not cruel, but knowing. You've heard it too. Webb didn't answer. Because he had. That silence, that pressure, that feeling, that something was there. People think it's empty out here, Silas continued, but it's not. He gestured toward the forest. It's full. Webb kept his voice steady. Of what? Silas tilted his head slightly, like the question didn't make sense. Of what's always been here. A pause. Then, they just forgot. Webb shifted, carefully steering. What about the people? Silas didn't answer immediately. He looked at the blade, ran his thumb across it. They come here, he said softly. Webb's chest tightened. They don't come back. Silas nodded. Not the same. That was it. Not denial, not defense, acceptance. Webb leaned slightly forward. Why? Silas looked at him again. And this time, there was something else. Pity. Because something has to be given, he said. The air shifted. Webb felt it. That same wrongness. Stronger now. Closer. Given to what? Webb asked quietly. Silas turned, pointed toward the forest. To it. No explanation, no elaboration. Just that. Webb followed his gaze. The trees stood still, but not empty. Never empty. You think this is about killing, Silas said. Webb didn't respond. It's not, Silas continued. It's about balance. The word echoed. Balance. You don't understand yet, Silas said. But you will. A long silence passed. Then Webb asked, the one question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. How many? Silas didn't hesitate. Not enough. The words hit harder than anything else. Because there was no madness in them. No chaos, no confusion, only certainty. Webb stepped back. For the first time, he felt it clearly. Fear. Not of Silas, but of something bigger, something he couldn't see, but knew was real. I'll be back, Webb said quietly. Silas nodded. I know. Webb turned, started down the ridge, and behind him, the sound returned, that same rhythm, that same slow, deliberate scraping. But this time, it didn't sound like a blade. It sounded like something else, something deeper, something answering. And far below, in the valley, Sheriff Clay stood watching the ridge, waiting, because he felt it too. Something had changed. And whatever was coming next was not going to stop. Chapter 8. Bones tell the truth. Truth does not shout. It settles. Heavy, unavoidable. They worked through the night, not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't stop. Dr. Henry Sutton laid everything out on a long wooden table inside the sheriff's office. Bones, fragments, cloth, each piece separated, measured, observed. The room smelled of iron and oil, and something else, something older. Sheriff Clay stood near the window. Not watching, not speaking, just waiting. Marcus Webb sat across from Sutton, notebook open, but untouched. Because for the first time, he didn't need to write anything down. This moment would stay. Sutton removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. I'll say this once, he said quietly. No one moved. These are human remains. The words didn't shock anyone. Not anymore. But hearing them made it final. How many? Clay asked. Sutton hesitated. Minimum 4 individuals. A pause. Possibly more. Webb leaned forward slightly. Any identification? Sutton nodded. Partial. He picked up a piece of fabric. This matches what was found at Sarah Holt's home. Clay closed his eyes briefly. Just a second, but long enough. And the others? Webb asked. Sutton swallowed. That's where it gets complicated. He reached for one of the bones, held it carefully. This, he paused, this has marks. Webb stood, moved closer. What kind of marks? Sutton didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed it to him. Webb looked and froze. Cuts, clean, precise, too precise. This isn't animal damage, Sutton said. Clay stepped closer now. What are you saying? Sutton met his eyes, and for the first time, there was fear in them. I'm saying... A pause. These were done intentionally. The room shifted. Webb's voice dropped. After death? Sutton shook his head slowly. No. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. Clay spoke, barely above a whisper. During. Sutton didn't answer, because he didn't need to. Webb stepped back, his mind racing, not with confusion, but with clarity. Silas Ward wasn't just killing, he was doing something else, something methodical, something repeated, something that required precision. This is ritual, Webb said quietly. Clay didn't argue. Couldn't. Then we end it, Clay said. His voice was different now. No hesitation, no doubt. We take him in. Webb looked at him, and for a moment he almost agreed. Almost. Then he remembered. Silas's eyes, his certainty, the clearing, the symbols, the way the forest felt. This isn't going to end clean, Webb said. Clay didn't care. It ends, he replied. That night, they made a plan. Simple. Direct. At dawn, they would go up the ridge, all of them, armed, prepared. No more watching, no more waiting. This time, they would bring Silas Ward down. But the mountains, they were already listening. High above the valley, inside the cabin, Silas sat alone, still, calm, as if he could hear them, as if he had always known this moment would come. He stood slowly, walked to the door, opened it. The night air moved around him, cold, alive. And from deep within the forest, something answered, not loud, not clear, but present. Silas smiled, not with joy, not with madness, but with recognition. They're ready, he whispered. And somewhere, in that dark, endless stretch of trees, something began to move, not toward the valley, but toward him. By morning, the hunt would begin. But it would not end the way they believed, because they were not walking toward a man. They were walking toward something older, something patient, something that had been waiting long before Silas Ward ever arrived. Chapter 9. The Arrest. Dawn came without warmth. The sun rose, but the valley did not feel lighter. It felt exposed. Men gathered in silence, rifles checked, boots tightened. No one joked. No one spoke more than necessary. Because they all knew this was not a search anymore. This was an ending. Or at least, they believed it was. Sheriff Clay stood at the front, still, grounded. Marcus Webb beside him, eyes fixed on the ridge. You ready? Clay asked. Webb didn't answer immediately, then, quietly, no. A pause. But we're going anyway. They began the climb. 10 men, armed, focused, the same path, the same twisting trail. But today, it felt different, shorter, as if the mountain was letting them pass. No wind, no birds, just footsteps and breath. When they reached the ridge, they stopped, not by command, not by fear, but because something was wrong. The cabin door was open, wide, waiting. Clay raised his hand. The men slowed, weapons lifted, careful, measured. Webb stepped forward first, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving. Inside, Silas Ward sat at the table, hands resting calmly in front of him. No weapon, no movement. He looked up as they entered, and smiled. "You took your time," he said. The words landed heavy. Clay stepped forward. "Silas Ward, you are under arrest." Silas raised a hand slightly, not to stop him, just acknowledging. "I know why you're here," he said. Clay's voice hardened. "Stand up." Silas did, slowly, without resistance. That was the first thing that felt wrong. No fight, no denial, no anger, just acceptance. Webb watched closely, too closely, because something didn't fit. "Turn around," Clay ordered. Silas turned, hands behind his back. The cuffs clicked. Loud, final, and still, he smiled. The men searched the cabin again, more thoroughly this time. Floorboards, walls, everything. Nothing new, nothing hidden, nothing that explained anything. It was too clean, still too clean. Webb stepped outside, looked toward the forest. That same feeling returned, stronger now, closer. "You feel that?" one of the deputies whispered. Webb didn't answer, because he did. They began the descent, Silas walking calmly between them. No resistance, no struggle. Halfway down, he spoke. "You shouldn't have done this?" Clay didn't look back. "Save it." Silas tilted his head slightly. "You think I'm the one taking them?" Webb stopped, just for a second. Clay didn't. "Keep moving," Silas continued. "I'm the one keeping it contained." Silence. One of the men laughed nervously. "Yeah? And what happens now?" Silas looked past them, toward the ridge, toward the forest. And for the first time, his smile faded. "It's not my turn anymore." The words followed them down the mountain, sticking, lingering. No one spoke after that, because no one wanted to ask what that meant. They reached the valley by late afternoon. The town watched, from windows, from doorways. Silent, because the fear wasn't gone. It had only shifted. They locked Silas Ward in a cell that night. Iron bars, heavy door. 2 deputies posted outside. No chances. Clay stood in front of the cell, studying him. "You're done," he said. Silas sat on the cot, calm. "No," he replied softly. A pause. "It's just beginning." Webb stood in the doorway, watching, listening, because something inside him refused to settle. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not like this. That night, the town tried to sleep, but the mountains didn't. And sometime after midnight, something moved in the forest. Not like before, not due, sound, not hidden, closer. And for the first time, it wasn't waiting. In his cell, Silas Ward opened his eyes and whispered, "I told you." Chapter 10. The First Night Without Him. Silence can change, not in sound, but in meaning. That night, for the first time in years, Silas Ward was not on the ridge, and the mountains noticed. The town tried to breathe again. Doors were still locked, windows still checked twice. But there was something else now. Relief, careful, fragile, like a man stepping onto ice, not sure if it will hold. Sheriff Clay didn't sleep. He sat at his desk, hat resting beside him, lamp burning low, listening, not for noise, but for change. Because something inside him refused to believe it was over. In the cell, Silas Ward lay awake, eyes open, still, not worried, not afraid, waiting. Midnight came quietly. No wind, No movement. The town rested, for the first time in months. Then, something broke. It wasn't loud. Not at first. Just a sound, deep in the distance. A crack, like wood splitting. Clay lifted his head, still, listening. Another sound. Closer this time. Not wood. Not exactly. Something heavier. Something alive. Clay stood, slowly, walked to the door, opened it. The night felt wrong, again, but worse now. Not quiet, but empty. Too empty. Across the street, a dog began to bark, sharp, panicked. Then, it stopped, mid-bark. Silence again. That's when Clay felt it. That pressure. The same one from the ridge. But this time, it wasn't far away. It was here. Inside the station, one of the deputies shifted. "You hear that?" he whispered. Clay didn't answer. He was already moving, toward the cell. Silas was sitting up now, waiting. "You feel it?" he asked softly. Clay gripped the bars. "What is it?" Silas tilted his head slightly, listening. "It's looking," he said. The words froze the air. "For what?" Clay asked. Silas smiled faintly. "For what I was giving it." Before Clay could respond, a scream tore through the night. Not distant, not from the mountains, from the town. Close, too close. Clay turned instantly. "Stay here," he shouted. He didn't wait, didn't think. He ran. The deputies followed, boots striking the ground, hearts already racing. The scream didn't come again. That was worse. They reached the source in less than a minute. A house. Door wide open, swinging slightly. Clay slowed, just a little, because he already knew. Something inside was wrong, very wrong. He stepped in, gun raised. "Hello?" No answer. The room was intact, table set, chairs in place. Nothing disturbed. Except one thing. The floor. Scratches. Deep. Dragging. Leading. Toward the back. Clay followed. Every step heavier. The hallway felt longer than it should. Darker. The air. Thicker. He reached the bedroom. Door open. And stopped. Because this wasn't like the others. This wasn't clean. This wasn't silent. The bed was torn apart. Wood splintered. Sheets shredded. And the wall. The wall was marked. Not scratched. Not broken. Written. Words carved deep into the wood. Jagged. Desperate. Clay stepped closer. Reading. Slowly. "Please." His breath caught. "It's not him." The room went still. Because in that moment, everything changed. Behind him, one of the deputies whispered, "Oh, God." Clay turned slowly. Because he realized something. Something terrible. Silas Ward had been telling the truth. Back at the station, Silas sat quietly, listening. And somewhere, outside, something moved through the town. Not hunting, not hiding, searching. Silas closed his eyes and whispered, "It's hungry now." Chapter 11. What was released? Panic doesn't begin with screams. It begins with silence, spreading. By morning, everyone knew. Not the details, not the truth. But enough. A man gone. A house torn apart. Words carved into wood. That made no sense. It's not him. The sentence moved through the town like a sickness, because everyone understood what it meant, even if no one said it out loud. They had taken the wrong thing. Or worse, they had removed the only thing holding something else back. Sheriff Clay stood in the wrecked house as the sun rose. The light didn't help. It made everything clearer. The damage, the violence. This was not careful. This was not controlled. This was rage. Marcus Webb crouched near the wall, studying the words again. "Look at the cuts," he said quietly. Clay didn't respond. "Different from the bones," Webb continued. Now Clay looked and saw it. The marks were uneven, desperate. Nothing like the precise cuts Sutton had described. "This wasn't him," Webb said. The words landed hard. Because they confirmed the one thing no one wanted to believe. Silas Ward was not the only thing in this story. Back at the station, the air had changed. The deputies spoke less, moved slower, as if noise itself might attract something. Silas sat in his cell, calm, still, watching. Clay entered without speaking, stood in front of him, long enough for silence to become pressure. "You're going to explain this," Clay said finally. Silas didn't look surprised. He looked tired. "You already saw it," he replied. Clay gripped the bars. "That wasn't you." Silas nodded. "No." A pause. Then, "You took me away." The words felt heavier now. "And now it doesn't have to hide." Clay felt something break inside him. Not fear. Control. "What is it?" he demanded. Silas leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, his voice lost its calm. "It doesn't have a name." The room went still. "It doesn't need one." Webb stepped closer, focused. "If it's real, then it follows rules," he said. Silas smiled faintly. "That's what you still don't understand." A pause. "It doesn't follow rules." Another pause. "It makes them." Outside, another scream. Closer this time. The entire station froze. Clay turned instantly. Not waiting. Not thinking. He ran. Again. Webb followed. Because now, there was no choice. They found her near the well, or what was left. No body, just the ground. Torn. Deep grooves carved into dirt and stone, as if something had dragged, something heavy, and beside it, a single shoe. Child-sized. No one spoke, because there were no words left. That's when Webb understood. Not fully, but enough. "It's not choosing randomly," he said. Clay looked at him. "Then what?" Webb swallowed, looked toward the ridge, toward the forest. "It's replacing something." The words felt wrong, but true. "Replacing what?" Clay asked. Webb didn't answer immediately, because the answer was already forming, slowly, horribly. Back in the cell, Silas closed his eyes and whispered, "It needs balance." By nightfall, the town changed. Not just afraid now. Broken, families gathered together, doors barricaded, lights left burning. No one alone, not anymore. But it didn't matter, because whatever had come was not hunting the way men hunt. It didn't stalk, didn't chase. It simply took. And somewhere, deep in the forest, something moved. Faster now, stronger, not contained, not controlled. Free. In the distance, a faint sound echoed, not quite a voice, not quite a scream, something in between. Something that didn't belong in the world of the living. And in the jail, Silas Ward whispered one final thing. And to no one. Or perhaps to something listening. You've started to understand. Chapter 12. The Old Records. Every place has a memory. Most are buried, some are erased, but a few refuse to stay hidden. Marcus Webb stopped looking at the present, because the present no longer made sense. Patterns existed, but they didn't begin here. They never do. The county records office sat at the edge of town, old, quiet, forgotten. The kind of place where truth collects dust. Webb entered just after sunrise. No one questioned him. No one wanted to, because everyone felt it now. Something had gone wrong. He moved through shelves of ledgers. Years stacked on years. Names, dates, deaths, lives reduced to ink. He started with the obvious. Nothing useful. Too recent. Too incomplete. So he went backward. Still nothing. Just ordinary deaths. Ordinary lives. Until the change wasn't obvious at first. Just gaps. Names listed, but no causes of death. No burial records. No explanation. Webb leaned closer, reading carefully. Missing. The word appeared once, then again, then again. Not many, but enough. 3 in 1 year. Then, nothing. Webb flipped forward. 2 more. Same pattern, same silence afterward. His pulse slowed, not from calm, but from recognition. It happens in cycles, he whispered. He gathered the records, brought them to Clay. The sheriff didn't like paperwork, but he read this, every word. They stopped, Clay asked. Webb nodded. After a certain point, yes. Clay leaned back, thinking. What changed? Webb didn't answer immediately, because he already knew. But saying it made it real. Silas Ward arrived in 1908, Webb said quietly. Clay's eyes lifted slowly. And before that, Webb tapped the records. The pattern existed. A pause. Then it stopped. Another pause. Until now. The room grew still. Clay spoke carefully. You're saying... Webb finished it. He didn't start this. The words hung heavy. He continued it. Clay stood, walked to the window, looked toward the ridge. Why would anyone do that? He asked. Webb's voice dropped. Because something made them. Back in the cell, Silas Ward sat in silence. Webb entered slowly. This time, not as an investigator, as someone looking for answers. You knew, Webb said. Silas looked up, not surprised. I learned, he replied. Webb stepped closer. From who? Silas didn't answer. Instead, he asked, Did you find the records? That confirmed it. You've known this whole time, Webb said. Silas nodded. It was here before me. A pause. It will be here after you. Webb leaned in. What is it? Silas held his gaze, and for the first time, there was something close to fear. It's not something you can understand by naming it. A breath. It's something you understand by losing to it. Webb felt it again. That shift. You fed it, he said. Silas didn't deny it. I gave it what it needed. People. Silas shook his head slowly. No. A pause. Balance. Webb's voice hardened. You think killing people keeps this thing satisfied? Silas leaned forward. I know it does. Silence. Because when it isn't... He stopped. then finished softly, "It comes into the open." Webb stepped back, because now he understood something worse than death. This wasn't about stopping it. This was about containing it. Outside, the mountains stood silent, but beneath that silence, something moved. Not new, not awakened, just no longer restrained. And for the first time, Webb realized the truth. They hadn't caught the monster. They had removed the man feeding it. And now, the mountain was hungry again. Did you know, in the early 1900s, the Appalachian Mountains, especially regions like North Carolina and Tennessee, were among the most isolated places in America. Many communities lived completely cut off from law enforcement, roads, and communication. Because of this isolation, disappearances were not uncommon and often never investigated properly. One real case that echoes your story is the legend of the Brown Mountain Lights in North Carolina, first officially reported in 1913. Witnesses described strange, moving lights deep in the mountains, appearing, disappearing, and behaving in ways that couldn't be explained. Even the U.S. Geological Survey investigated in 1922, but failed to give a definitive explanation. At the same time, records from rural Appalachian counties show missing persons and undocumented deaths that were never solved, largely due to poor record-keeping and geographic isolation. In places like these, if someone vanished, there was often no evidence, no search, and sometimes no answer at all. Answer at Chapter 13, The Choice. There are decisions a man makes, and then there are decisions that make the man. By evening, the town knew enough. Not everything, not the truth, but enough to feel it. Something worse than a killer was out there, and the only man who understood it was locked behind iron bars. The meeting was held in the church, not because it was sacred, but because it was the only place big enough to hold fear. Men filled the benches, women stood in the back, children kept close. No one spoke loudly, because loud voices made things feel real, and no one wanted that. Sheriff Clay stood at the front, tired, older than he had been a week ago. Marcus Webb stood beside him, silent, watching. "They want him released." The words came from the crowd, sharp, uncomfortable. Clay didn't respond immediately, because saying yes or no meant choosing a side, and both sides were wrong. "He killed people," one man said. "And now more are dying," another answered. The room began to shift. Not chaos, but pressure. He kept it contained. "We didn't know that. We do now." Webb closed his eyes briefly, because this was the part he feared most. Not the thing in the woods, but what people become when fear takes over. "They're asking the wrong question," Webb said quietly. The room turned toward him. "It's not whether he's guilty," he continued. "It's whether we're willing to become part of what he was doing." Silence. "Feeding it?" someone whispered. Webb didn't answer, because the word had already landed. Clay stepped forward, his voice steady but heavy. "If we let him out, we are choosing this." A pause. "Not stopping it." Another pause. "Managing it." The room shifted again, because that was worse. "And if we don't?" a woman asked. No one answered, because everyone knew. More people would disappear. More houses, more screams, more nothing left. Webb spoke again. This thing existed before him. He looked around, meeting every eye, and it will exist after him. A pause. "So the question isn't whether Silas Ward is evil." Another pause. "It's whether he's necessary." That broke something, because necessity is harder to argue against than evil. The room fell silent. No more shouting, no more arguing. Just people, facing something they never thought they would have to. Clay turned away, because he already knew. what was coming. Later that night, in the station, he stood in front of Silas's cell. Long. Still. "You knew this would happen," Clay said. Silas nodded. "They always reach this point." Clay's jaw tightened. "There were others before you." Silas's eyes flickered. "Yes." A pause. "They failed." Clay stepped closer. "Or you replaced them." Silas didn't deny it. "Tell me one thing," Clay said. Silas waited. "Does it ever stop?" A long silence. Then, very quietly, "No." The word settled like a weight on Clay's chest, because that meant there was no winning, only choosing how to lose. Webb stood in the doorway, listening, and for the first time he felt something deeper than fear. Helplessness. Behind them, the town waited. For a decision, a terrible one. And before the night ended, they would have to make it. Because somewhere, in the dark beyond the ridge, something was still moving, still searching, still taking. And it wasn't slowing down. Chapter 14. The Bargain. Every horror has a rule, not a law, not a system, a rule, simple, ancient, and always paid for in blood. They brought Silas out just before midnight, not as a prisoner, but not as a free man either, something in between. 2 deputies at his sides, chains still on his wrists. Sheriff Clay walked ahead, Marcus Webb behind. No one spoke. Because this wasn't an arrest anymore. This was negotiation. They stopped at the edge of the ridge, the same place, where the forest began, where the air changed. Silas looked out into the darkness, and for the first time, he inhaled deeply, like a man returning home. "You shouldn't bring everyone," he said quietly. Clay didn't respond. "They don't need to see this," Silas added. Webb stepped forward. "They already are." Silas glanced at him and nodded. "Yes," he said softly. "They always are." The forest stood still. Too still. No wind, no sound, just presence. Silas took a step forward. The chains clinked softly. "It won't come to you," he said. Clay's voice was tight. "Then how does this work?" Silas turned and looked at all of them. Really looked. "You don't summon it." A pause. "You offer." The word landed heavy. Webb felt it immediately. That shift. "What kind of offer?" he asked. Silas held his gaze. "The kind it understands." No one spoke, because no one wanted to say it, but everyone knew. Silas turned back toward the forest. "It doesn't think like you," he said. "It doesn't hate. It doesn't choose." Another pause. "It balances." Clay stepped forward. "Balance what?" Silas pointed toward the valley. "Us." The answer didn't make sense, and yet it did. "It takes," Silas continued. A pause. "And something has to be given back." Webb's voice dropped. "You made that decision." Silas nodded. "Yes. And now you want us to do the same." Another nod. "You already are." That hit harder than anything else, because it was true. By doing nothing, they were still choosing. Clay looked at the men behind him. Farmers, fathers, brothers, people who had come to stop something, not become part of it. "Tell me the rule," Clay said. Silas hesitated, just slightly. Then he spoke. "One life in place of another." The words echoed. Simple, clean, unforgivable. Webb stepped forward. "That's not balance." Silas looked at him. "It is, to it." A long silence followed. Because now, It was clear. Not a mystery, not a question. A choice. Behind them, one of the men whispered, "We can't do this." Another answered, "What choice do we have?" The forest shifted. Not visibly, but something moved. Closer. Silas felt it. They all did. "It's already here," he said quietly. The air tightened. That pressure, stronger than ever. Watching. Waiting. Clay's hand trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the weight of it. "If we do this," he said slowly, "it doesn't stop." Silas shook his head. "No." A pause. "But it slows." Webb closed his eyes, because that was the truth. Not salvation. Delay. And sometimes that's all people choose. The forest breathed. A sound. Low. Deep. Not a voice, not an animal. Something else. Something that did not belong, but had always been there. Silas stepped forward again. "Decide," he said. Because the thing in the woods was no longer waiting. Chapter 15. The Offering. No one remembers the exact moment the decision was made, because no one wants to. It didn't happen with a vote. No raised hands, no agreement spoken out loud. It happened in silence. In the way no one stepped back. In the way no one said no. And that was enough. The forest waited. You could feel it now, not as fear, not as sound, but as presence, watching, expecting. Sheriff Clay stood at the edge of the trees. His hands felt heavier than they ever had, not because of a weapon, but because of what they were about to do. "We don't have to," Webb started. But the words died before they could finish, because both of them knew they already did. Behind them, a man stepped forward. No one noticed at first, or maybe they did, and chose not to stop him. His name was Aaron Pike, a widower, no children, no one waiting for him at home. "I'll do it." The words were quiet, but they cut through everything. Clay turned sharply. "No." Aaron shook his head. "You said it yourself," he replied. A pause. "Someone has to." Webb stepped forward. "This isn't a choice. It's fear." Aaron looked at him, not angry, not desperate, just tired. "Everything is fear now," he said, and there was no argument left against that. Silas watched, silent, not approving, not stopping, because this was the rule. Aaron stepped toward the forest. Slowly, deliberately. Each step felt heavier than the last. The trees didn't move. The air didn't change. But something was coming closer. Webb felt it first. That pressure, crushing. Like standing too close to something, too large to see. "Wait," Clay said. But it was too late. Aaron had already crossed the line. The moment his foot touched the shadow of the trees, everything changed. The silence broke, not with sound, but with absence. The world felt like it had pulled back, like something else had stepped forward. Aaron stopped, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't move. His body stiffened, his breath shallow, his eyes wide, looking at something no one else could see. Webb stepped forward instinctively, but Silas grabbed his arm. "No." That single word. Final. The air warped. That was the only way to describe it. Not movement, not shape, but distortion. Like reality itself was bending. Aaron tried to speak, but no words came out. Only a sound. Something between a scream and silence. Then he was gone. Not dragged. Not taken. Gone, as if he had never been there. The forest returned to stillness. Instantly, completely. No sound, no movement, nothing. Clay staggered back. What was that? He whispered. No one answered. Because there was no answer. That made sense. Webb stood frozen, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes had seen. That wasn't death. It was something else, something worse. Silas released his arm slowly. It's done, he said. The words felt wrong, because nothing about that felt finished, but the pressure was gone. The air, lighter. The forest, silent again. Balanced. And that was the worst part. Because it had worked. Clay looked at the others. No one spoke. No one moved. Because they all understood now what they had just become. Not survivors, not heroes, but participants. And once you cross that line, there is no going back. Deep in the forest, something settled, satisfied, for now. And on the ridge, Silas Ward looked into the darkness, not relieved, not proud, just aware. Because he knew this was not the end. It never was. Chapter 16. After the silence. The mountains were quiet again. Not the same quiet. This one felt earned, paid for. Morning came gently. No screams, no broken doors, no missing names. The town woke, and for the first time in days, nothing had changed. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. People stepped outside carefully, looking around like something might still be there, watching, waiting. But there was nothing. No sign, no trace. Just silence, and the memory of what it had cost. Sheriff Clay stood alone near the ridge. The same place, the same trees. But it didn't feel the same, because now he knew. There was something beyond that line, something that did not belong to the world, but still existed inside it. And he had fed it. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from understanding. Behind him, Marcus Webb approached slowly. Neither man spoke at first, because there were no words left that could make anything better. Finally, Webb broke the silence. It worked. Clay didn't turn. Yes, he said. A pause. That's the problem. Webb looked toward the forest. His mind kept replaying it. That moment. Aaron Pike, standing there. And then, nothing. No struggle, no resistance. Just erased. That wasn't death, Webb said quietly. Clay closed his eyes. I know. The truth sat between them. Heavy, unavoidable. They hadn't stopped something. They had participated in it. Back in town, people didn't speak about Aaron. Not directly, not openly, because naming him meant remembering, and remembering meant facing what they had allowed. His house remained empty. Door closed. No one touched it. Like the place itself was now part of the forest. Dr. Sutton stopped working. He said it was exhaustion, but the truth was, his hands wouldn't stay steady. Not after what they had seen, but after what they had confirmed. The deputies drank more, spoke less. Every sound at night still made them look up. Because even though it had stopped, no one believed it was gone. And Silas Ward was still in his cell, calm, watching, like a man who had seen this all before. Webb visited him that evening. No notebook this time, no questions prepared, just one. You've done this before. Silas looked up. Yes. How many times? Silas didn't answer directly. Enough to know what comes next. Webb felt it, that cold realization. This doesn't end, he said. Silas shook his head slowly. No. It just pauses. The word echoed. Pause. Like a breath. Before something begins again. Webb stepped closer. And when it starts again? Silas met his eyes. You'll be the one they look at. That hit harder than anything else. Because it was true. Silas had been the one before. Now, it would be someone else. Someone who understood. Webb stepped back. Because he finally saw it. The real horror. Not the thing in the forest, but the role it created. The cycle. The necessity. That night, the town slept again. Not peacefully, but deeply. Because exhaustion is stronger than fear. And in the distance, deep in the forest, something rested. Not gone. Not finished. Just waiting. And somewhere, in the quiet of his own thoughts, Marcus Webb realized something he could never unlearn. The next time it started, he would know exactly what to do. And that was the most terrifying part of all. Chapter 17. The Next Keeper. Time doesn't heal everything. Some things, it teaches you to live with. Weeks passed. No disappearances, no screams, no broken doors. The town returned to something that resembled life. Fields were worked again. Children stepped outside, carefully. Voices returned, quiet, but present. From the outside, it looked like survival. But inside, nothing was the same. Sheriff Clay resigned 2 weeks later. No speech, no explanation. He simply handed in his badge and left. Some said he moved west. Others said he stayed in the mountains. No one went looking, because some men aren't meant to be found again. That left Marcus Webb, the outsider, the man who had come to solve something, and stayed to understand it. He didn't leave. That was the first sign. His work was done. His report could have been written. The case closed, but he remained. Walking the same roads, watching the same ridge, listening. Every night, he stood at the edge of town, looking toward the forest, waiting. Not out of fear, but expectation. Because now he understood the pattern. Not if, but when. Silas Ward remained in his cell, unmoved, unchanged. But something about him had shifted, not physically, but in presence. He was no longer the center. Webb was. One evening, Webb entered the station, slowly, deliberately. Silas looked up, and for the first time, he smiled differently, not knowingly, not calmly, proud. "You stayed," Silas said. Webb didn't respond immediately. Then, yes. A pause. "You understand now?" Webb met his eyes. "I understand enough." Silas leaned back slightly. "That's how it begins." The words didn't feel like a warning. They felt like confirmation. Webb stepped closer. "How long before it starts again?" Silas didn't hesitate. "It already has." That stopped everything. "What do you mean?" Webb asked. Silas tilted his head, listening. "You don't feel it?" And then, Webb did. That pressure. Faint. But there, deep in the distance, like something shifting in its sleep. Webb turned slowly, toward the ridge. The forest stood still, but not silent. Never silent. "When?" Webb asked. Silas answered softly. "Soon." That night, Webb didn't go home. He walked up the path. The same one. The one that led to the ridge. Each step familiar now, not foreign, not feared, known. He reached the edge of the forest, stopped. The same place Aaron Pike had stood, the same invisible line. Webb looked into the trees. And for the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt recognized. The air shifted, that pressure, stronger now, closer, not threatening, expectant. Webb closed his eyes briefly, and in that moment, he understood the final truth. The thing in the forest didn't need to be hunted, didn't need to be stopped. It needed to be managed, fed, balanced. And someone had to do it. Webb opened his eyes, stepped back. Not out of fear, out of decision. Because he knew what came next. Behind him, the town slept. Unaware, as it always was. And on the ridge, for the first time since Silas arrived, someone else stood in that place. Watching, waiting, learning, and deep in the forest, something stirred. Not awake. Not yet. But soon, Chapter 18, The Mountain Remembers. The mountains do not forget. They do not forgive. They remember. Winter came early that year, the kind of winter that buries sound beneath snow, the kind that makes the world feel smaller, safer. That illusion didn't last long. The first sign was subtle, a delay, a missed routine, a door left open just a little too long. No one said anything, not at first, because everyone remembered what came after noticing. Marcus Webb stood at the ridge again, same place, same line, but he was no longer the man who had first climbed it. His posture had changed, not tense, not uncertain, still, measured, like Silas had once been. Behind him, the town continued its fragile routine. Fields, fires, families, all built on something they refused to name. Webb looked into the forest, and this time he didn't search for movement. He waited for it. It came slowly. That pressure, that presence. Not aggressive, not violent, just there, watching, the same way it had always watched. "You're early," a voice said behind him. Webb didn't turn. "Am I?" he replied. Silas Ward stepped beside him, unchained now, not free, not imprisoned. Something else. "You felt it," Silas said. Webb nodded. "It's starting again." Silas didn't respond, because that wasn't a question. They stood in silence. Two men, bound not by law, but by understanding. "How long did it take you?" Webb asked finally. Silas glanced at him. "To accept it?" Webb didn't answer, because that was exactly the question. Silas looked back at the forest. "Long enough to stop fighting it." A pause. "And after that?" Silas's voice softened. "It got easier." Those words should have been terrifying. But they weren't. That was the problem. A sound echoed faintly in the distance, not loud, not clear, but familiar. Something between a voice and something that had never learned how to speak. Webb stepped forward, not crossing the line, but closer. "I understand now," he said quietly. Silas watched him. "Do you?" Webb nodded. "We don't stop it." A pause. "We manage it." Silas said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Behind them, far in the valley, a dog barked suddenly. Sharp, panicked. Then, silence. Webb closed his eyes. Just for a moment, then opened them again. Resolved. "It has to be done before it chooses," he said. Silas nodded once. Yes. That was the final step. Not understanding, not fear. Acceptance. Webb turned, looked back at the town. Lights glowing softly. People moving inside homes, unaware. protected. For now. Then, he looked at the men gathering behind him. Quiet. Waiting. They didn't ask questions anymore, because they already knew. Somewhere among them, someone would step forward. They always did. And when that moment came, Webb would not hesitate. Because hesitation cost more than sacrifice. The forest shifted, not violently, but knowingly, like something ancient, recognizing a familiar pattern. The cycle had not been broken. It had continued. And the mountain, as it always had, remembered. Far behind them, the town slept, and deep within the forest, something waited, not for prey, but for balance. And on the ridge, a new keeper stood, watching, waiting, just like the one before him, just like the one before that. Because some stories don't end, they repeat. And the mountains never forget.